I've been doing these videos talking about how we're discerning the calendars and that there's a 30-day calendar month and a 360-day calendar year. That's clear in God's word, Genesis 7-8. Also in the 1260 days being defined as a time, times, and half a time. We're still discerning that part. I mean, this is a fact. I mean, it's a biblical fact. But the only way for us to understand how to put it into practice and if there's anything that we come up against is to actually put it in practice. But more recently, I have been discerning something with God that is irrefutable. And the more I test it, the more proof he gives me that this is indeed how to understand his Sabbath. Now, I want you to think for a moment. Jews have gone into captivity, and the word tells us that they have lost God's Sabbath. Lamentations 2:6. He has laid waste his dwelling like a garden. He has destroyed his place of meeting. The Lord has made Zion forget her appointed festivals and her Sabbaths. In his fierce anger, he has spurned both king and priest. He's already told us that he's done it. And he also has told us in his word through Paul that Jews who have not accepted Christ are enemies as far as the gospel is concerned, but loved on account of the patriarchs, but enemies as far as the gospel is concerned. So it doesn't make sense for us to go to Reformed Judaism. It's not correct Judaism. It's not true Judaism, but Reformed Judaism. That is the Judaism that is being practiced today. It does not make sense for us to go and ask them what the truth is and to say, oh, they've kept meticulous records. No, they haven't. The word tells us that they haven't. The word tells us that they have lost God's Sabbaths and appointed times. So what does that mean for Christians? Did God make a way for Christians if he commands us that we're supposed to observe his appointed times and which his Sabbaths are part of his appointed times? Has he made a way? Yes, he has. He has made a way based on his calendar that is regulated and his ordinances that are regulated by the moon. In the word, in Jeremiah, we are told that the Lord gives us the sun for a light by day and the ordinances of the moon. That word for ordinances means statutes, means ordinances, means that God has ordained this to help you to understand how to obey what he has commanded. He commands us to observe a new moon festival. That new moon festival begins with the crescent. Think about this commonsensically. You don't need to go to science to tell you what a new moon is because they tell you that it's the dark moon. That's not true. If in nature, during certain times of the year, right now, during winter, my trees, my fruit trees or my deciduous fruit trees lose all their leaves. And then the thing that's new in spring is when those leaves start to grow again. And then I know we're starting something new. And then it cycles through and it loses its leaves again. If God established that in nature repeatedly, not just with deciduous trees, then do you think that he has established a pattern that he's continuing with? Yes. So you have the moon cycles, which begin with light showing up, something new, and it continues to grow until it blossoms into this full moon, and then it wanes back down again to a waning crescent, and then to nothing, which is the dark moon, not the new moon. How do you define dark as new? Isn't that just what the world would do? Like the Antichrist field of science that denies that there's a creator, try to covet and usurp his definition of what is new to be darkness? Of course. New moon begins with the crescent. It begins when the light shows up. And it just so happens that in God's moon, there are 4 sets of 7-day periods. 4 sets of 7-day periods. There are actually 5 Sabbaths, but 4 sets of 7-day Sabbaths. Okay, so what I mean by 7-day Sabbaths is you rest for 6 days, you work for 6 days, you rest on the 7th. Work for 6 days, rest on the 7th. That happens on the 2nd day of the month. How do we know that? Because the first day is actually a new moon festival, and that is a day of rest. So God has separated days into work days and rest days. And so he has the first day of the month, which is a rest day. So the 2nd day has to be a work day. So you have the 2nd, the 3rd, the 4th, the 5th, the 6th, and the 7th dates of the month, which are rest days. And then the 8th day of the month correlates to that 7th day in which you're going to be resting. Okay, so from the 8th, now the 9th on God's calendar, the 10th, 11th, 12th, 13th, 14th, those are going to be work days. The 15th is a rest day. 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21, work days. 22nd, rest day. 23rd, 24th, 25th, 26th, 27th, 28th, work days. And then the 29th is a rest day. Then you have a work day on the 30th, and you're right back up to new moon because there are 30 days in God's calendar. And so you have the 29th being a rest day, 30th being a work day, and the 1st being a rest day. Now, has he ever done this in the Bible? Because there should be, some sort of pattern that helps us to understand, that he has established this in some way. What I'm saying is there needs to be a way to test it. The Day of Atonement is the 10th. That day is a rest day. The previous day is a work day. So you have work day, rest day, work day. Let's go a little further back. The 8th day is a rest day. The 9th is a work day, and the Day of Atonement is a rest day. So you have rest day, work day, rest day. Same thing with the 29th. Rest day, work day, rest day. So yeah, there is an established pattern in which God does not have a continuous stream of 7 days. The new moon restarts the month and restarts those 7-day periods. The moon is also on a 7-day cycle, so you can see that at the beginning of the month, you have new moon on the 1st day. On the 8th day, you're going to have a first quarter moon. On the 15th day, these are all Sabbaths. The 15th day is going to be a full moon. Then you're going to go to a last quarter moon on the 22nd. And on the 29th, you'll be back down to a dark moon. Now, is this established in Scripture? Yes, of course it is. In Psalm 81, 3-5, it says, blow the trumpet at new moon. Okay, that's the crescent. At the full moon on our feast day. For it is a statute in Israel, so this is commanded, an ordinance of the God of Jacob. He appointed it in Joseph for a testimony. We know that the full moon is the 15th because it's occurring on the feast day. Just so happens that the 15th of God's month is a full moon. That is the 7th day cycle of that moon. Now let's test it again. So I have proposed to you that the first day is a new moon Sabbath. It is a day of rest, but it's an appointed feast day Sabbath. It's not the same as a 7th day Sabbath, because remember what I told you, that the 29th is a Sabbath, the 30th is a work day, and then the 1st day is going to be a rest day again. So that's not a 7th day Sabbath. That is a feast day Sabbath. It's observed the same way. We're only making the distinction that it's not a Sabbath because it's a 7th day. But God has established that all of the rest of those feast days in Leviticus 23, except for new moon, which of course is not in Leviticus 23, and the Day of Atonement, which is a day set apart by itself, every other Sabbath in those appointed times is either the 1st, Festival of Trumpets, the 8th, based on what he states about Sabbath in Leviticus 23, 6 days of work, 7th day you rest. That would be the 8th day, based on the new moon being a day of rest. So you would have the 2nd, 3rd, 4th, 5th, 6th, 7th, and then the 8th day of rest. The other festivals begin on the 15th as a Sabbath. Then they end on the 22nd, and they are commanded to be a Sabbath. The only day that starts out and is not a Sabbath is the Passover, the 14th day of God's month. And then you see in the Word that the reason they had to take the bodies down from the crosses is because the Jews were concerned, after ironically just killing the Messiah, that they wanted to be in obedience with God, right? They needed to take the bodies down because it was the day of preparation for Sabbath. And so we know that the next day also we're told in the Word that it was a high Sabbath or a special Sabbath, meaning that it was both a feast day Sabbath and a 7th day Sabbath. Based on these patterns outlined to us in the Word, we know that the 8th, the 15th, the 22nd, and the 29th are 7-day Sabbaths. We know that the 1st is a new moon Sabbath, and that during holy days, the 15th and the 22nd are going to be high Sabbaths or special Sabbaths. If you have any questions about this, I want you to post them here. Please ask your questions. I will respond to you. I had this experience where I had emailed people who were talking about this, and it just wasn't making sense to me that they were starting on the dark moon. Some other things were not making sense to me. I really was feeling like they were just trying to plug this into a narrative. I don't recommend that you go listen to it. You can, but test the information that you're being presented and test it with the word. Because whatever people are saying, it's like, all people who speak Hebrew know blah, blah, blah. No, people who speak Hebrew are not our authority. People who speak Hebrew also oftentimes will listen to rabbinical commentary to tell them what a Hebrew word means. So that is a problem. God is our authority. Everything that we need to know will be in his word. It'll be confirmed that way, but you need to have a little bit of patience. This is personal experience. You will have to have some patience while he's revealing it to you. And yes, your brain is going to melt, but at the end of it, you're going to have the truth. And that's the only thing that matters. Who cares about a bunch of false narratives? That doesn't get you anywhere. The only thing that is going to get you somewhere is truth. And that only comes from God's Spirit. So I sent out about 6 or 7 messages to people who had articles online or were talking about this. Only one responded to me about 3 days later after I'd already discerned this with God. And I could see that she was speaking on her own authority and speaking on the authority of so-called Hebrew. And I've seen people do this a million times. They take a concept in Hebrew and they go and find a teacher who's going to tell them what they want to hear about that. What's the word tell you guys? They are enemies as far as the gospel is concerned. Not the Jewish race is not an enemy. Jews who have not accepted Christ. There are Jews who have accepted Christ. Hello, they were the first Christians. Christian is not an ethnicity. Neither is Jew, as it turns out. Jew means that you have been circumcised in heart. But there are those who identify as ethnic Jews who have rejected Christ. There are those who identify as religious Jews who have rejected Christ. Are you going to go to them to tell you what the truth is? That doesn't make any sense. You need to go to God. And the way that you understand what these words mean is go to where he uses that word in a sentence. So you can use something like Strong's Concordance to look up what is the original word being used here. And the benefit of Strong's Concordance, I don't use everything on there because it isn't all true. There's a reason Jesus rebuked the scribes in the Bible because their consciences are seared. The translators in the Bible, right? What you want to do is take all of the context in which Strong's is showing you this word is being used in all of these contexts of Scripture and go look at how God used it in a sentence. That's what's going to help you to understand the word, not learning Hebrew. Learning Hebrew is going to be essentially based on the authority of the world. By the way, word is not just written in Hebrew. So if that's the authority that you think you need in order to understand the word, you better go learn Hebrew, Aramaic, and Greek. And you're still not going to come to truth. Because if you don't see the way that God used it in a sentence, you'll be led away by the authority of man. Sabbath is not on Sunday. Sabbath is not on Saturday. Sabbath is on the 8th day of the month, the 15th day of the month, the 22nd, the 29th, and there is also a new moon Sabbath on the first day of God's month. Sabbath is always going to be set in reference to the moon. It's going to restart according to new moon day, the first day of that crescent. God never referred to these days by name. Do you know why? He referred to them by day 1 through 7, and he never said that they're going to restart at the same time either. I showed you that with the Day of Atonement. Wait, I've done a couple videos, so I'm not sure if I showed you this. Let me make sure that I did. God has separated his days into rest days and work days. I've told you that the rest days are going to be the 1st, 8th, 15th, and 22nd and 29th. Well, you have 30 days in God's month. So you have the 29th, which is a rest day. That's a seventh-day Sabbath. The 30th is a work day. And the 1st starts back over with new moon. God has established this pattern before with the Day of Atonement. Day of Atonement is the 10th day. What did I tell you? The 8th is a Sabbath rest day. So you have a rest day, a work day on the 9th, and a rest day on the 10th. Same pattern. So is God concerned about there being consecutive 7 days in order to what? Like accommodate the narrative of the Romans? No. He set new moon day as a command in order that you would always be able to observe his command as long as you love truth. New moon day, rest day. Then 6 days of work and a 7th day of rest, which brings you back up to the 8th of God's month. The reason God never used these days in terms of Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, or some other name, he didn't give these days a name because he was not going to be saying that this is going to be on Saturday or whatever the name day is. It's always set in reference to the moon. Now, let me tell you something else that I'm realizing right now, because we've been discerning the months. And in previous videos, I have said that those months, that God's months and the feast days could go on any season of the year, but that's actually not correct. I was basing that on a 360-day year in which the seasons are going to be pressed back on a Gregorian calendar. But listen, we're still discerning this. We still need to understand. I was looking at Leviticus 23 and I was saying, okay, well, there are season-specific feast days and then there are date-specific feast days. On a 360-day year, you could technically have these landing anywhere if the seasons are being pushed back. If the feast days are being pushed back into different seasons, eventually you're going to be on in every season of the year. No, we're going to take the Bible at what it says. And so the other day, God had reminded me of the Festival of Tabernacles, in which it talks about luxuriant trees. Take the branches of luxuriant trees, gather the crops of your field, and then he specifically talks about certain kinds of trees like palms and willows. Well, willows are a deciduous tree. And so you can't, first of all, gather the crops of your field during winter, and you wouldn't have any luxuriant branches in winter. And now I'm realizing, as I'm saying, okay, God did not name these days, that he did name the months. Not all of the months. He didn't give us all of the names of the months, but he did name most of them. So let me pull that up right now because I have that listed out. The first month is Nisan or Aviv. The second is Ziv. The third is Sivan. Then you have the 4th and the 5th month are not named in the Bible. The 6th is Elul. The 7th, Ethanim. 8th, Bul. 9th, Kislev. 10th, Tebeth. 11th, Shebat. And the 12th is Adar. Now, you may have heard other names for months, such as Tishrei and Tammuz. This is really disgusting, okay? First of all, they're Babylonian names. But Tammuz is only mentioned one place in the Bible. And it's mentioned as a false god in Ezekiel. And the sign of Tammuz is the cross. Let me restate that. The image of Tammuz is the cross. Do people bow down to worship that? That is actually the abomination of desolation in Ezekiel. We are certain of that. But that's for another video. I've done videos on that. If you have trouble finding them, let me know and I'll give you the link. So do you think that God is pleased that people are referring to his months that he named by Babylonian names and false gods? It's gross. So here's my point. If God wanted us to observe the 7th-day Sabbath on a particular day in a series of consecutive 7 days, he could have named that day and we would have just been going ahead and observing that. But that's not what he did. He restarted the days based on 6 days you work, 7 days you rest. So we know the dates on which these are going to occur. Now, one thing, okay, so sorry, I'm moving ahead, but let me get to that in a moment. The fact that he named his months does tell us that they need to occur with the seasons. They are occurring at the same time. So in this case, that gives us a little more information about what I know he's he's telling me right now he's going to reveal that 30-day month and that 360-day year. He's giving me the little teaser to give me the energy that I don't have because my grandchild just left and drained me of everything. But now, you get your second wind when God starts giving you information like that. Then you're like, okay, I got to sit here and study. I can't take a nap because it's just so exciting, honestly. All right, so we have that piece. Now, the other piece that I want to say, one could say, well, how can you say that the 8th day is a Sabbath, the 15th day is a Sabbath when you have the Day of Atonement occurring on the 10th of the month? Now, remember that in that same month that the Day of Atonement is occurring, that is in the 7th month, the month of what? What did I say the name was? Not Tishrei, that's the Babylonian name that Jews are using. The month of Ethanim, that's what the word says. And in that seventh month, that is the month of the fall holy days. So we know that the 15th is a Sabbath because that 15th is the Festival of Tabernacles. The first day of the Festival of Tabernacles is the 15th day of the 7th month. So we know that that's going to be a Sabbath. Okay, and then we also know that the 15th of the first month in the spring holy days during the Festival of Unleavened Bread, that 15th is also a Sabbath and is defined as a special Sabbath or a high Sabbath because there have been 6 days of work. And in order to not disrupt that, he did not make the 14th, which is Passover. That's when you are slaughtering the lamb and you're having that Passover meal. He didn't make that a Sabbath in order to not disrupt that. Well, now, what is he doing here in the 7th month with disrupting that? Well, he didn't refer to the 15th of the 7th month as a high Sabbath or a special Sabbath, did he? He simply said you are to observe it as a Sabbath so that you're continuing to stay on track, by the way, with work days and rest days. So with the 15th being a rest day, now you're not going to lose track of the 16th, 17th, 18th, 19th, 20th, and 21st being work days, and the 22nd getting you back in line to being a rest day. And then again, the 23rd through the 28th being work days, and the 29th being a rest day again. So he keeps you on track during those holy days in order to make sure that you continue to maintain that 6 days of rest, I keep saying that, 6 days. Wouldn't that be nice? 6 days of rest, 6 days of work, and 7th day of rest. In saying that the 15th of the first month was a special Sabbath, what he's saying is that it was both a 7th-day Sabbath and that it was a holy day Sabbath. I know this is a lot of material. It's very cumbersome, but again, I just want to invite you to ask whatever questions you want. I will respond to you. I will search scripture with you. I know you're not getting that other places, and that people are just basically expecting you to speak, accept their authority. Please don't make that mistake. That's what's gotten us into this pickle, now. I mean, the Romans are the ones who changed. Initially, actually, Saturday was the first day of the week for them, and they changed it to the 7th day of the week. It doesn't matter. Like, their week is not the same week that we have. It's not the same week that we have been commanded to observe of 7 days. Our month is defined in terms of rest days and work days. It's not defined really in terms of what we understand to be a week in the world that is consecutive and just restarts with the week. The only authority is God, you guys. So if this is something that you want to understand, I will trudge this with you. Also, I want to remind you that God's Sabbath is a sign between us and him. What's it a sign of? That we have loved truth in order to really search the word and understand that his Sabbath is defined in this way. It's not defined by the Romans. It's not defined by the Catholic Church, the SDA Church. It's not defined by the world's authority. It's defined by God. And if you are seeking truth in this way, he's going to confirm it over and over and over. And he really has done that. I mean, this is totally to his glory. Please go discern this with him.